Welcome to the SLAB. I'm Angie.
I'm Nathan.
And we're here to talk about all things videography. Whether you're a novice like me or an expert like Nate, we talk about everything from gear to approaches to people that are in other businesses that complement your business as a videographer. So you can view the video if you're listening to this on YouTube at youtube.com/@slabvisuals. And if you're watching us on YouTube, you can always stream on your favorite platform. And so today we are going to talk about all things storage.
Yeah. So as you go on your video journey and as cameras get higher resolution and the video file sizes are getting bigger, and if you're making a living from that video that you're creating, the data, excuse me, and the time that it takes to transfer that data starts to add up really fast. And so the ways that you store and manage that data is what I consider one of the fundamental pillars to running your video business. It's very important. So whether you have a stack of SD cards sitting in a corner of your desk or a full-on server in your office, we're going to talk about all types of storage today, as well as the challenges that we as visual professionals face when we're dealing with terabytes of data.
That's right. Yeah. And this is a super crucial topic, especially if you're trying to make a living as a visual professional, right? Because you can, like with all things, opt for the cheaper route and have, a lot of headache, a lot of work involved in data management, or you can maybe be at a point where you can invest, but it's really the name of the game is efficiency and protection, right? Because this is your livelihood. So yeah, there's different types of storage. Can you talk to us about that?
So I've kind of narrowed it down to 3 different types of storage. So the first type is storage with moving parts. So that's like the spinning, when you think of a hard drive, spinning disks in the hard drive. If you grew up in the 80s or 90s, you remember the computers that had the sound.
Oh, yes.
That was the hard drive.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very nostalgic. So that's one. So spinning hard drives, and then also magnetic tapes. And you wouldn't think those are still a thing, but they call them LTO, magnetic tape drives. We're going to talk a little bit more about those, but that is also a moving part one. The second type is storage with no moving parts. So I'm talking about memory cards that go in like your camera, SSDs. It could be the RAM in your computer as a form of no moving part memory, and optical media like CDs and DVDs. And then the third type is cloud or online storage. And then, like I said, we're going to talk more about all these later.
Yeah. And, in case you are a novice, everybody watching this probably already knows, but using acronyms like SSD, that refers to a solid state drive, correct?
Yeah.
Look how pro I am. Okay.
Nailed it. Yeah. So let's start out with the drives, that have moving parts, and that's the spinning drives and tape drives. So spinning drives, like I said, these are generally what you think of as hard drives, and these are generally the highest capacity drives for the dollar, right? I think they're up to 18 terabytes now on the hard drives that you can get. They started putting helium. You'll see helium putting it in there so that the drives could move faster without friction. So
if I suck on that hard drive, do I get a high-pitched voice?
I don't even know if there's enough in there to do that. It's like a small amount.
Just checking. Probably a real waste of money if you compromise the helium in there.
Yeah.
Proceed.
So,
sorry.
So back on track now that Angie's thinking about helium. So these drives are usually found inside like PCs and NAS or server setups. And when I talk about a NAS, I mean network attached storage. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But these are best suited when you need cheaper, because it's much cheaper, like per terabyte, than SSD storage is, and you have higher read-write cycles over the lifetime of the drive.
Read-write cycles?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
So putting information on and taking information off and rewriting that information. Yep. But they're not necessarily the fastest transfer speed. Yeah. So the second moving one is called tape drives, and you may not know this because it's kind of a little more of a fringe. Like if you're into archival stuff, you would definitely know what the tape drives are. But basically, these are cartridges, and they're about this size, and they're often.
He's holding his hands up in about 4-inch by 4-inch square.
Thank
for
you.
Those that are listening and not watching.
I know. I didn't forget you listeners. And so LTO stands stands for linear tape open. And so, like I said, these are best suited for archival, and it's because you can only put data onto these drives in one line, and you can only take it off in one line. So there's no hunting and searching for an individual file. It's when you want to put like an entire hard drive's worth of data on and take a hard drive's worth of data off of these tapes. And they have different sizes of these tapes. I forget how many terabytes they go up to now, but the cost per terabyte to store is very cheap if you're doing a large, I'm talking about like over 200 terabytes of data. If you want to archive it, the cost is much, much cheaper to do the LTO tapes than it is to do like a Amazon cloud or even just standard hard drives. And they're also known for the longevity. So you can store these in ideal conditions up to 30 years, which isn't the case for a lot of like the spinning drives or even SSDs, because electronics break down over time. So so that's LTO and tape drives. But you do need a device that can read and write those. So you have the cartridges, and then you also need a device, and that can get a little pricey. I looked into that.
That's always where they get you.
Yep. Yeah. So the next one is no moving parts, right?
SSD, solid state drive.
Yep. SSD. And these are the drive where data is stored and read from chips on a circuit board. So most SSDs you use will be what they call like flash type memory, meaning they can read and write many times, and the information will be retained when there's no more power to the device. So unlike RAM, right? RAM is in your computer. That is also a type of flash or it's a type of SSD memory. But when you turn your computer off, all that information in your RAM is dumped, so it's a different type of thing. The things that and also the SD cards and your CFast cards that you use in your cameras are a form of SSD memory. And they also, in your computers now, they've made a lot of solid state drives like in what they call the M.2. So if you built a computer or bought one in the past, probably, I don't know, 4 years, that's probably the type of memory that you have now, just because it's gotten cheaper, but it's also so much faster for read and write. And that's really one of the benefits of it, is that the read and write speeds are just insanely fast now.
Yeah. So, I mean, breaking that down, that means files are going to open faster. Files are going to load to your whatever you're editing much faster. And, that all plays into efficiency.
Yeah. Because you talk when you get to editing and moving files and editing, you look at what the bottlenecks are in your system. And so that can be, data can be a bottleneck.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep. So next up is optical media. And so that's CDs and DVDs. And you would think, like, who still uses CDs and DVDs? But you'd be surprised. They're still around. I mean, it's interesting lately, I've seen with the streaming services now getting so expensive and people getting what I call subscription fatigue, and some of the services like just dropping TV shows altogether. So if you had a favorite TV show, for example, HBO, which is now, it used to be HBO Max, now it's just Max, they dropped Westworld. So there's no way to watch Westworld. So people are seeking out the Blu-ray DVDs of the Westworld seasons, because if you want to watch it, that's the only way to do it. And so they're kind of making a little bit of resurgence and a comeback. And the advantages that these have is that they're physical media, and that it's optical in the sense that it can last. They say the Blu-rays can last up to 100 years. That wasn't always the case with the rewritable CDs, because it was a different way that the data was stored on there. But up to 100 years, which is pretty crazy. But the downside is the size of data, right? You can only put up to, I think the newest Blu-rays, like the Ultra HD, you can store like, it's either triple or quad layer. Blu-rays can do like up to 125 gigabytes now.
Yeah, so not even a terabyte.
No. And if you're trying to, again, for production workflow, that's not realistic. But, if you're trying to archive something that's maybe a bunch of photos, like 125 gigs is perfectly fine for thousands and thousands of photos. So, and there's actually, there's one disc called the M disc that was specially designed. They say that can hold data up to 1,000 years, I think, for archival, which is, again, pretty wild.
Bananas.
Yeah.
Fun fact, the last time that I saw any CDs or DVDs, it was on Instagram in a hydraulic press.
Oh, yeah, I watched those.
Because I love watching those. And yeah, I haven't really seen those around lately.
Well, we have them because we actually have a Plex server and have ripped a lot of our DVDs
They're just packed away.
onto
Yeah.
a hard drive, onto a spinning hard drive actually, because well, it's cost efficient per terabyte, and we use those for our home Plex server, so we have like our own Netflix basically for
Yes.
our home.
Our own curated.
Yeah, curated.
Yes.
Yep.
That sounds
Yep.
bougie.
Yep.
Okay.
So the third is cloud and online storage. And so this can be anything from Dropbox to like Google Drive to Blackmagic Cloud and Adobe Cloud, all the way to like Amazon, what they call AWS service. I should look up the acronym, but Amazon AWS, which is basically their cloud enterprise level cloud service, and Microsoft's Azure cloud service. And this is a great choice if you need to access data from anywhere. To work collaboratively or even have backups of your information on site.
Yeah. And I think Google Drive has really made that kind of a universal experience for a lot more people because it's so accessible and kind of beginning to understand what the cloud is. But like there's just so much capability there that, it's beyond, I think, the average citizen's knowledge, unless you're into storage and constantly moving data or building documents and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and we use probably most often, I would say, the Blackmagic Cloud. We use that daily for collaboration on our projects. It's a really seamless workflow with the cameras and proxies. And then after that, I would say probably Dropbox.
Yeah. For delivery to clients, that seems to be a really accessible way for them to get to it. Yeah.
Yep. And it's the most easiest to create links because Google does all kinds of weird stuff. They want to zip up your files every time you download them, and I don't know. It's just
yeah.
I get frustrated with Google Drive a lot. So yeah. So talking about whether you want to use the memory internally, externally, or a network or server. So I want to talk about what each of these are: internal, external, network, or server. So if you're going to use the data internally, this would be basically any hard drive or solid state drive that you have inside your laptop or PC. And it's handy for things, I would say, like smaller cache files or even smaller projects, but usually not what you're going to use for an entire project, right? Now, external drives, we've all had experience with these because if you've been out in the field or shooting away from your office, and sometimes you need to dump footage. These can be spinning or SSD drives, but they connect usually via USB or Thunderbolt or Wi-Fi. And so this could even be, sorry for the train, by the way, we're at our co-working spot and it's right beside railroad tracks. So you're going to hear...
Spokane has railroads like much of the nation.
Yes. Yeah. So just want to acknowledge that. So you're going to connect via USB or Thunderbolt or Wi-Fi. And like I said, it could even be card readers that you use to dump cards while you're filming. And then the last one is network or server. So this is either a hard drive or a NAS, which we said was network attached storage, which is most often connected via Ethernet. And in best case scenarios, that'd be 10 gigabit Ethernet and or Wi-Fi. And this can be remote or local access.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, those are the options, but like, is there a preferable one? Like, once you have your PC built, like you're limited to what that hard drive can do. So then you're going to rely on that external hard drive, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Most likely, if you're shooting video for a living, you're gonna end up with some kind of external hard drive solution, because that much data is usually hard to keep, for that many hard drives within a PC case.
And like, is there a push point or a tipping point at which you like find it's time to get a server or something that's more robust to be able to store?
I mean, that's kind of personal preference. Like, I think there's probably a lot of people out there who have that shelf of hard drives who look at this and go, I've got my system, but there's got to be something better. That's kind of where I was at maybe 5 years ago. And I probably had at that time, 40 terabytes, maybe 30 or 40 terabytes worth of information. And I was like, there's got to be something better. And that was when I took the trip into, do I use LTO tape? Do I want to archive? Do I want to have stuff accessible? And that's kind of led me to network attached to the NAS, the Synology NAS setup that we use today. Yeah. So let's talk about data management workflow, because that's kind of the direction we're going. And we'll talk about all the way from the pipeline from capturing to archiving it, right? So the first step is capturing it, and that's exactly what it sounds like. It's, when you're on site and you've got SD cards or CFast cards, or even a US like B connected SSDs. Some of the cameras now, at least the Blackmagics, you can hook up an SSD via USB C port and record straight to that, which is awesome because that's sometimes the most cost-effective media is those SSDs connected via USB, and so it's nice that you can utilize that. And so is that, and you're the cameras get better, and like we said, can shoot in higher resolutions. The data rates get better. You're going to want media that has a higher capacity, and you always want to make sure that the read speeds and write speeds can keep up with what your camera is dumping onto it. So, these sensors now that can record in RAW and high bit rates and high frame rate, I mean, they're dumping a lot of data onto these hard drives, and so you want to make sure that your hard drive can handle that. And there's a lot of camera manufacturers will publish what they call like a recommended memory list, like a memory card list. I could, there's a QVL list, but it's not that. Anyways, but they'll recommend what memory it works with, and that's usually a good jumping off point. You don't always have to get exactly what they recommend, but that's a good jumping off point for that. So the next step after capturing it is working with it, and working with it. The first thing I have to say is
back it up.
Yeah. Always back up your data, and because you've seen how stressed I've been, and
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing worse when you're making your livelihood from all this footage that you got for a client, and then you don't know where it is and how to get it back. So yeah, be sure to back it up.
Yeah, because it's the thing with hard drives is, and even memory cards, is not if they're going to die, but when, right? And so you want to always try to hedge your bets against that, because when you get into, people paying money for your services, and, for you to film something, it's like, there's no excuse to lose data on that. And, for me, I remember, so back in the day, I don't know if you guys remember Chase Jarvis, but, I remember he did a video, this is probably almost 10 years ago now, I'm dating myself, but about their data workflow at their studio. And the one thing that stood out to me was that, he was on site shooting like a thing for Nike or something. But he said at the end of the day, they would dump all the data onto 2 hard drives, and one hard drive will live with him in his hotel room, and the other hard drive will live with his editor in his hotel room, in the hopes that if there was a fire and the hotel burned down, at least one of them would get out with a hard drive with all the project's data.
I hope they both get out.
Yeah, I know,
but I mean,
scenario. I mean, they're probably not sleeping with the hard drive on their person, so they'd have to grab it. But
I just meant the people, not the hard drives. But yeah, in that horrifying scenario.
Yeah.
And that's why we would always double down to, I used to work at a different place. And so we would have some hard drives that I would keep at my workplace and then some in our office. And that way they were in separate locations.
Yep. Yeah. And that's a good point about separate locations, is that, losing, I always look at it as like losing footage is not an option. Right. And so, duplicating that footage, getting it in a different location, so that if, God forbid, that building burned down, that you would still have
flooded
it
or something. You just don't know. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And then also, getting it up in the cloud is another option. And maybe and again, all that costs money, and that's something that you have to kind of factor into your business pricing model, is how you want to charge for data and storage and management.
Yeah, and from a business perspective, to take the time to calculate, like how much time am I spending doing data management? Because our time is money, and, it might be a hard juggle to go is it worth spending this on this upgrade for storage? But if it's going to save me X amount of hours, and those are hours that I could be working, editing, filming, that should factor in and could be a great way to help calculate if it's worth the move towards a better storage option for yourself.
Yep. So back to your data management workflow after capturing it and working with it. Another factor working with it after you back it up, which is everything. Transfer speeds. That's something you need to think about because, when you're working with high-res video, if you have a spinning drive, your data transfer rate is probably about 120 megabits a second, right? Versus an SSD, which they go up to over a gigabyte a second now. And that's a huge amount of time that, I mean, if you have that kind of time, great. But the difference when you're transferring over like 250 gigs or even 500 gigs or a terabyte, for a spinning drive, a terabyte is probably going to take you, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours maybe on that. But on an SSD, you can do a terabyte in probably under an hour, maybe 45 minutes, I think, 30 to 45 minutes, depending, even less if you have like the fastest drives. So it's just something, like you said, time is money. And so, if you need to get that to a different drive to take off site to edit or to get to an editor, like the transfer time is something to take into consideration. And another thing too is we talked about bottlenecks, and a bottleneck can be you have to make sure the drive you're going to and going from and to both have high enough write speeds and read speeds, right? Because if you have an insanely fast drive that has a insanely fast read speed, but you're going to a drive like a spinning drive that has a really low read speed or write speed rather, it's always going to default to the lowest speed drive. So you can have the fastest SSD in the world, but if you're going to a spinny drive,
you're going to be around a while.
Yep. Exactly. And then cabling too is something to consideration. So cables. So like, again, if you have an SSD and let's say, even if you're plugged into like a USB 3.2, so the newest generation or Thunderbolt, but you have a really low quality cable, the data transfer sometimes can be affected by that cable. That's why sometimes with certain devices that have, higher end charging or whatever, come with a specific cable, and they say you use a high quality cable with this device, this hard drive, for that exact reason, because the cabling matters as well.
And I think that it's, I'm not great at diagnosis. Like, it's not something I take time to do, but it sounds like there's a lot of diagnostics in like your workflow to take the time to think like, okay, what isn't speaking well to the other, and just taking that time to figure it out and going like, oh, I need a better cable, and that could greatly improve things, could make a big difference. And just part of my makeup is like, I'm just going to grit through it. This is just the way it is. And it doesn't have to be that way if you're willing to take the time to kind of diagnose like, where's the communication bottleneck?
Yep.
Yeah.
And the last thing in working with your data is a NAS, so network attached storage. So what is that? Usually it's a box that basically is its own computer, and you have multiple hard drives. It can be 2 up to probably 100 you can do, and it's set up in what's called a RAID setup. And what a RAID setup is, basically it writes all the data across all the drives at once. And that does a couple things for you. Number one, it increases the speed. So let's say you do have like a spinny drive, like where, your highest data rate is 120 megabytes. But when you put, 5 or 10 of those drives together, you can then boost up to, 500 megabytes per second write speed, because you're combining the speed of all those drives together. And there's some
sharing the load.
Exactly. Yep. And there's some other ways too that it speeds up those NAS will use a cache, so you can put SSD caches in the spinny drive NAS, and that will also help, because if let's say your cache is like maybe 2 terabytes, if you're transferring a file that's 500 gigabytes, it'll help cache that file and then distribute it across the spinning drives on there. It offers expansion as well. So there's different options for NAS drives out there with RAID settings. We like the Synology. That's the one I've used probably the past 5-6 years, I think. And I bought 2 systems, so one is the primary, one is the backup. And I've been super happy. This is an advertisement for them. I'm just speaking of my own experience, but basically it runs a version of Linux on there, so it gives you a user interface that looks very similar to Windows, but it's built on Linux. And there's so many tools and access and things that you can do with your NAS, you can make it like your own cloud if you want to make it your own Dropbox. Yeah, there's a lot of things, and you've used it too, right?
Well, I suppose like our Plex is on that, right? Yeah. Yeah. So it's our that serves as our Plex server, and so anytime that I'm going on for a movie for the kids or something like that, one of my old favorites, I go on to Plex and use that. And I've seen it come to the rescue too, because that RAID backup, like when there's a crash or something like that, has all that fabulous data that it can piece back together for you.
And that's something we didn't mention about the RAID setup, is that it gives you redundancy, right? And you can set that up in the settings for, and this is for any RAID, like you could set up a RAID setup in your PC if you wanted to. It doesn't have to be a NAS. You can do a RAID setup amongst, it's anytime you get more than two drives or more. You have to have something to control it, a RAID controller, so whether that's your PC or a dedicated box, but excuse me, you can do that. But the redundancy is key, so you can set up what they call one drive redundancy or two drive, and basically what that says is that when one of the drives goes down, all the data is still stored amongst those other drives, and you can do what's called a hot swap. So you can pull that the bad drive out real time. You don't have to shut anything down, just leave it running, put a fresh drive in, push it back in, and it starts to rebuild that drive with the rest of the information across there. And so there's no downtime, and it's a way of again, not losing your data on there. So just it's a good peace of mind, efficient, and you can do up to 2, 3, 4 drive redundancy if you want across there. So yeah. So the next item on your data management workflow is.
Oh, you should back it up.
Backing it up, yeah. I want to drill that in, backing up. The fourth one is what I have called long-term storage or archiving. So after you're done, deliver the project, you've gone through revisions, the client's happy, and you kind of wipe your hands. Whatever you've agreed to with the client, whether it's handing them a hard drive or archiving it yourself, whatever you've negotiated with them. It's good to know what your options are for long-term storage. So you can do the NAS, the network attached storage for archiving. That's kind of what I do for projects. You can compress things into a smaller size. So if you shot, in 6K at a high bit rate, you could do it into like a 1080 if you don't need full resolution archives. So that's one way. That's probably the easiest way. Another is the LTO tape that we talked about earlier.
Right.
But again, that only makes sense if it's going to be like over 200 terabytes and it's something that you just need a copy of it somewhere, and you may never access it, but it's good to know that you can access it if you need to. It's like that style of storage. And then the last is cloud storage. And so the one I know most about is the Amazon AWS. And again, it's enterprise class storage. A lot of people run their businesses off the Amazon cloud, but it's pretty expensive. Like even if you're trying to keep 100 terabytes in there, I think it was like they wanted. There's different classes of storage of how often you need to access it and how often you need to get access, whether it's within 5 hours or 24 hours. They have different pricing models for that. But last time I checked it, for like 100 terabytes, it was going to be like $3,000 a month or something like that. So again, it's not, you look at what kind of NAS storage or setup you could buy for $3,000, and it's just not as cost effective for a large amount of data long term. But that is an option. If you have a large amount of data that you need to put it on the Amazon cloud, they will actually send you a physical machine. I forget what it's called. There's a name for it, but it's a physical machine like half the size of this table, and you can hook up like fiber optic data connections to it and just dump a vast amount of data onto it, and then you send it back to Amazon to one of their data centers, and they dump that into their mainframe cloud. But yeah.
Wild.
So very few people, I'm sure, listening to this will ever need that about that. But
time will tell.
Yeah.
Time will tell.
So the last topic on data storage, we've covered a lot of ground today, and I'm sure your ears are probably bleeding from talking about megabytes and terabytes, but
SSDs.
Yeah, SSDs. Yeah. So the last topic is...
Oh, crap. I lost my data. What do I do now?
Is it data or data?
Well, It's data if you're on Star Trek, and it's data if we're talking about data management.
Unless you're Dr. Pulaski in season 2, in Star Trek: The Next Generation, where she says data for the entire season. But that's a very obscure nerd reference. Okay, so back to topic 4. Oh crap, I lost my data one now. So data recovery. Let's say you didn't do your due diligence with backing stuff up, or stuff happens, right? And you lost a hard drive, or you got damaged, run over by a car, an eagle grabbed it and chomped it before you had a chance to back it up. What do you do? What are your options, right? Well,
likely scenarios, all of those. Yes, very good.
You never know.
What do you do?
So software, there's 2 options, software, and then what I call the nuclear option. So software option first. There's a lot of programs out there that promise a lot of things with data recovery software. And sometimes they will work, and you can get basically what it does, in my understanding, is it rebuilds the directory. So there's like some version of that file on the drive. It rebuilds the directory, and then you get access to the file from there. And so I've used in the past, for me personally, because this has happened to me, a lot of things you're hearing about today is
firsthand experience.
Painful experience. Yeah. So 2 programs that I've used to pretty good success is Disk Warrior, and the second one is Stellar Data Recovery to get data back. And a lot of times these will require subscriptions to them, so that's just something to keep in mind, that you might have to buy a year subscription or a year license for, like, I think Stellar Data Recovery is like where you had to buy a year license, is how that worked. So just keep that in mind. The last option is what I call the nuclear option. So if none of the software stuff doesn't work and your local data professional in your town can't recover it, there's a place called Drive Savers Data Recovery. Now, I've used these guys as well. And this company utilizes a professional clean room, and they can retrieve data off of everything from like a RAID setup, like we talked about, like your NAS, to drives that were damaged in like a fire or flood.
Or an eagle.
Or an eagle. Yep, exactly. And even to the point where, they get hired by government agencies for like ransomware and forensic imaging, which they use in like court cases and stuff like that. So they're the real deal. And like I said, I've used them. It's not an advertisement, it's just what I've used, and they've been great to work with. But they're expensive. So expensive in the fact that they don't list their prices, and that's always a sign that
you're going to be
can't afford
paying a lot. Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So you have to get a specific quote for your situation. And thankfully, it's been a long time since I've had to use their services, but they were really great to deal with and responsive when I did use their services. Just to give you an idea, though, like how much you're going to be paying, like when I last talked to them, it was probably like a decade ago. To recover data, it was about $2 a gigabyte. So if you're looking at a terabyte of information, right, which is 1,000 gigabytes, you're looking at around $2,000 per terabyte to recover that drive. It might be more, it might be less now. Like I said, it's been a long time, thankfully, but that's why. So just taking this all into account, how much that costs, how much is your data worth to you, right? And it's far easier, I can tell you from experience, it's far easier to pay that extra money on the front end for, like a NAS setup that's going to have drive redundancy and a second setup, a backup somewhere that's off-site. It's way easier to do that kind of stuff. And have, if you do lose something, you can just literally, get your drive back from offsite and recover it, rebuild it, and keep moving.
And not just the financial savings in the long run, but like the mental health aspect of, like, it is wildly stressful. I'm sure you've been there, if you're listening or watching, but to some degree. But there's nothing worse than that your gut bottoming out when like you just lost something and this project has a deadline. That's just not fun.
Yeah, because I mean, if it's somebody's wedding, right, something that happens only one time, or if it's a client that paid a lot of money to hire actors and to get permits,
can't get that back.
Permits on stuff. Yeah, exactly. That's like there's a lot of money invested. So it's your job as a video professional to do the due diligence and make sure you got your data workflow and your storage handled.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we are so grateful that you listened. Thank you for listening to the SLAB. And, if you are listening and would like to watch, remember we're on youtube.com/@slabvisuals. We would love to hear your comments, your experiences. We'd love to share your stories if you have any of your own data mishaps.
Oh, man, I'm sure there's some out
data
there.
mishaps.
Yeah.
I almost asked you, is it nuclear or nuclear when you did that, but I didn't, just because you razzed me about data. But yeah, we'd love to hear your questions. So just email us, podcast@slabvisuals.com, or you can comment if you're listening on YouTube. We're super stoked that you're with us, and we hope you go out and create something.
Yeah, go create something. See you later.